Hi, my name is Dawn and I work at the Saskatoon Public Library. I am here today on Treaty 6 land, homeland of the Métis, to read a few pieces from the book A Walk in the Woods by Bill Bryson. Not long after I moved with my family to a small town in New Hampshire, I happened upon a path that vanished into a wood on the edge of town. A sign announced that this was no ordinary footpath, but the celebrated Appalachian Trail, running more than 2,100 miles along America's eastern seaboard through the serene and beckoning Appalachian Mountains. The AT is the granddaddy of long hikes. From Georgia to Maine, it wanders across 14 states through plump hills whose very names, Blue Ridge, Smokies, Cumberlands, Catskills, Green Mountains, White Mountains, seem an invitation to amble. Who could say the words Great Smoky Mountains or Shenandoah Valley and not feel the urge, as the naturalist John Muir once put it, to throw a loaf of bread and a pound of tea in an old backpack and jump over the back fence? And here it was, quite unexpectedly, meandering in a dangerously beguiling fashion through the pleasant New England community in which I had just settled. It seemed an extraordinary notion that I could set off from home and walk 1,800 miles through the woods to Georgia, or turn the other way and clamber over the rough and stony White Mountains to the fabled prow of Mount Katahdin, floating in a forest 450 miles to the north, in a wilderness few have seen. A little voice in my head said, "Sounds neat, let's do it." I formed a number of rationalizations. It would get me fit after years of waddlesome sloth. It would be an interesting and reflective way to reacquaint myself with the scale and beauty of my native land after nearly 20 years of living abroad. It would be useful, I wasn't quite sure in what way, but I was sure nonetheless, to learn to fend for myself in the wilderness. When guys in camouflage pants and hunting hats sat around at the Four Aces diner talking about fearsome things done out of doors, I would no longer feel like such a cupcake. I wanted a little of that swagger that comes from being able to gaze at a far horizon through eyes of chipped granite and say in a slow, manly sniff, "Yeah, I've shit in the woods." And there was a more compelling reason to go. The Appalachians are the home of one of the world's largest hardwood forests. The expansive relic of the richest, most diversified sweep of woodland ever to grace the temperate world. And that forest is in trouble. If the global temperature rises 4 degrees Celsius over the next 50 years, as is evidently possible, the whole of the Appalachian wilderness below New England could become savanna. Already trees are dying in frightening numbers. The elms and chestnuts are long gone, the stately hemlock and flowery dogwoods are going, and the red spruces, Fraser firs, mountain ashes, and sugar maples may be about to follow. Clearly, if there was ever a time to experience this singular wilderness, it was now. So I decided to do it. More rashly, I announced my intentions to friends, neighbors, confidently informed my publisher, made it common knowledge among those who knew me. Then I bought some books and talked to people who had done the trail, in whole or in part, and came gradually to realize that this way was way beyond anything I had attempted before. Nearly everyone I talked to had some gruesome story involving a guileless acquaintance who had gone off hiking the trail with high hopes and new boots and came stumbling back 2 days later with a bobcat attached to his head, dripping blood from an armless sleeve and whispering in a hoarse voice, "Bear," before sinking into troublesome unconsciousness. Literally unimaginable things could happen to you out there. I heard of a man who stepped from his tent for a midnight pee and was swooped upon by a short-sighted hoot owl. The last he saw of his scalp, it was dangling from talons prettily silhouetted against a harvest moon. and for a young woman who was woken up by a tickle across her belly and peered into her sleeping bag to find a copperhead bunking down in the warmth between her legs. I heard 4 separate stories, always related with a chuckle, of campers and bears sharing tents for a few confused and lively moments. Stories of people abruptly vaporized. 'Tweren't nothing left of 'em but a scorch mark. By body-sized bolts of lightning when caught in sudden storms on high ridges. Of tents crushed beneath falling trees, or tents eased off precipices on ball bearings of beaded rain and sent paragliding onto distant valley floors, or swept away by the watery wall of a flash flood. Of hikers beyond counting, whose last experience was of trembling earth and the befuddled thought, now what the? My first inkling of how daunting an undertaking it would be came when I went to our local outfitters, the Dartmouth Co-op, to purchase the equipment. My son had just gotten an after-school job there, so I was under strict instructions of good behavior. Specifically, I was not to say or do anything stupid, try on anything that would require me to expose my stomach, say, "Are you shitting me?" when informed of the price of a product, be conspicuously inattentive when a sales assistant was explaining the correct maintenance or aftercare of a product, and above all else, I was not to don anything inappropriate, like a women's ski hat, in an attempt to amuse. I was told to ask for Dave Mangle because he had walked large parts of the trail himself and was something of an encyclopedia of outdoor knowledge. A kindly and deferential sort of fellow, Mangle could talk for perhaps 4 solid days with interest about any aspect of hiking equipment. I have never been so simultaneously impressed and bewildered. We spent an entire afternoon going through his stock. He would say things to me like, "Now, this has a 70 denier high-density abrasion-resistant fly with a ripstop weave. On the other hand," and I'll be frank with you here, and he would lean into me and reduce his voice to a low, candid tone, as if disclosing that it had once been arrested in a public toilet with a sailor. "The seams are lap-felled rather than bias-taped, and the vestibule is a little cramped." I think because I mentioned that I had done a bit of hiking in England, he assumed some measure of competence on my part. I didn't wish to alarm or disappoint him, so when he asked questions like, "What's your view on carbon fiber stays?" I would shake my head with a rueful chuckle, in recognition of the famous variability of views on this perennially thorny issue, and say, "You know, Dave, I've never been able to make up my mind on that one. What do you think?" Together we discussed and gravely considered the relative merits of side compression straps, spindrift collars, crampon patches, load transfer differentials, airflow channels, webbing loops, and something called occipital cutout ratio. We went through that with every single item. Even an aluminum cook set offered considerations of weight, compactness, thermal dynamics, and general utility that could occupy a mind for hours. In between, there was lots of discussion about hiking generally, mostly to do with hazards like rock falls, bear encounters, cook stove explosions, and snake bites, which he described with a certain misty-eyed fondness before coming back to the topic at hand. With everything, he talked a lot about weight. It seemed to me a trifle over-fastidious to choose one sleeping bag over another because it weighed 3 ounces less. But as equipment piled up around us, I began to appreciate how ounces accumulate into pounds. I hadn't expected to buy so much. I already owned hiking boots, a Swiss Army knife, and a plastic map pouch with a string that you wear around your neck. So I felt I was pretty well. But the more I talked to Dave, the more I realized that I was shopping for an expedition. The 2 big shocks were how expensive everything was. Each time Dave dodged into the storeroom or went off to confirm a denier rating, I stole looks at the price tags and invariably was appalled of how every piece of equipment appeared to require some further piece of equipment. If you bought a sleeping bag, then you needed a stuff sack, and the stuff sack cost $29. I found this an increasingly difficult concept to warm to. When, after much consideration, I settled on a backpack, a very expensive Gregory, top-of-the-range, no point in stinting here sort of thing, he said, "Now, what kind of straps did you want with that?" "I beg your pardon?" I said, and recognized at once that I was on the brink of a dangerous condition known as retail burnout. No more now would I blithely say, "Better give me a half a dozen of those, Dave." "Oh, I'll take 8 of those." "What the heck? Make it a dozen." You only live once, right? The mound of provisions that a minute ago had looked so pleasingly abundant and exciting, all new, all mine, suddenly seemed burdensome and extravagant. "Straps," Dave explained. "You know, to tie on your sleeping bag and lash things down." "It doesn't come with straps?" I said in a new, level tone. "Oh no," he surveyed the wall of products and touched a finger to his nose. "You'll need a rain cover too, of course." I blinked. "A rain cover? Why?" "To keep out the rain." "The backpack's not waterproof?" He grimaced as if making an exceptionally delicate distinction. "Well, not 100%. This was extraordinary to me. Really? Did it not occur to the manufacturer that people might want to take their backpacks out from time to time? Perhaps even go camping with them? How much is this pack anyway?" $250. $250? Are you I paused and put on a new voice. "Are you saying, Dave, that I pay $250 for a pack and it doesn't have straps and it isn't waterproof?" He nodded. "Does it have a bottom in it?" Mangles smiled uneasily. It was not in his nature to grow critical or weary in the rich, promising world of camping equipment. "The straps come in a choice of 6 colors, he offered helpfully. I ended up with enough equipment to bring full employment to a veil of Sherpas. A 3-season 10 self-inflating sleeping pad, nested pots and pans, folding cutlery, plastic dish and cup, complicated pump-action water purifier, stuff sacks in a rainbow of colors, seam sealer, patch kit, sleeping bag, bungee cords, water bottles, waterproof poncho, waterproof matches, pack cover, a rather nifty compass thermometer key ring, a little collapsible stove that looked frankly like trouble, gas bottle, spare gas bottle, a hands-free torch that you wore on your head like a miner's lamp. This I liked very much. A big knife for killing bears and hillbillies, insulated long johns and vests, 4 bandanas, and lots of other stuff, some of which I had to go back again and ask what it was for exactly. I drew the line at buying a designer ground cloth for $59.95, knowing I could acquire a lawn tarp at Kmart for $5. I also said no to a first aid kit, sewing kit, anti-snake bite kit, and a $12 emergency whistle, and a small orange plastic shovel for burying one's poop, on the grounds that these were unnecessary, too expensive, or invited ridicule. The orange spade in particular seemed to shout, "Greenhorn! Sissy! Make way for Mr. Buttercup!" I took all this home and carried it down to the basement in several trips. There was such a lot, nearly all of it technically unfamiliar to me, which made it both exciting and daunting, but mostly daunting. I put the hands-free torch on my head, for the heck of it, and pulled the tent from its plastic packaging and erected it on the floor. I unfurled the self-inflating sleeping pad and pushed it inside, followed that with my fluffy new sleeping bag. Then I crawled in and lay there for quite a long time, trying out for size the expensive, confined, strangely new-smelling, entirely novel space that was soon to be my home away from home. I tried to imagine myself lying not in a basement, beside a reassuring, cozily domesticated roar of a furnace, but rather outside, in a high mountain pass, listening to wind and tree noise, the lonely howl of dog-like creatures, the hoarse whisper of a Georgia mountain accent saying, "Hey, Virgil, there's one over here. Y'all remember the rope?" But I couldn't really. I hadn't been in a space like this since I stopped making dens with blankets and card tables at about the age of 9. It was really quite snug, and once you got used to the smell, which I naively presumed would dissipate with time, and the fact that the fabric gave everything inside a sickly greenish pallor, like the glow off a radar screen, it was not so bad. A little claustrophobic, perhaps, a little odd smelling, but cozy and sturdy even so. This wouldn't be so bad, I told myself, but secretly, I knew that I was quite wrong. At Christmas, I put notes and lots of cards inviting people to come with me on the trail, if only part of the way. Nobody responded, of course. Then one day in late February, with departure nigh, I got a call. It was from an old school friend named Stephen Katz. Katz and I had grown up together in Iowa, but I had pretty well lost touch with him. Those of you, the 6 of you, who have read Neither Here Nor There will recall Katz as my traveling companion around Europe in that delightful tale of youthful adventure. In the 25 years since then, I had run into him maybe 3 or 4 times on visits home, but hadn't seen him otherwise. We had remained friends in a kind of theoretical sense, but our paths had diverged wildly. "I've been hesitating to call," he said slowly. He seemed to be searching for words. "But this Appalachian Trail deal, do you think maybe I could come with you?" I couldn't believe it. "You want to come with me?" "Oh, if it's a problem, I understand." "No," I said. No. You're very welcome. You're extremely welcome." "Really?" He seemed to brighten. "Of course." I really could not believe it. I wasn't gonna have to walk alone. I did a little jig. I wasn't gonna have to walk alone. "I can't tell you how welcome you would be." "Oh, great," he said in a flood of relief, then added in a confessional tone, "I thought maybe you wouldn't want me to come along." "Why ever not?" "Because, I still owe you $600 from Europe." "Hey, geez, certainly not. You owe me $600? "I still intend to pay you back." "Hey," I said. "Hey." I couldn't remember any $600. I had never released anyone from a debt of this magnitude before, and it took me a moment to get the words out. "Listen, it's not a problem. Just come hiking with me. Are you sure you're up for this?" "Absolutely." "What kind of shape are you in?" "Real good. I walk almost everywhere these days." "Really?" "This is most unusual in America." "Well, they repossessed my car, you see." "Ah." We talked a little more about this and that, his mother, my mother, Des Moines. I told him what little I knew about the trail and wilderness life that awaited us. We settled that he would fly to New Hampshire the next Wednesday, and we would spend 2 days making preparations, and then we'd hit the trail. For the first time in months, I felt positively positive about this enterprise. Katz seemed remarkably upbeat, too, for someone who didn't have to do this at all. My last words to him were, "So, how are you with bears?" "Haven't got me yet." That's the spirit, I thought. Good old Katz. Good old anyone with a pulse and a willingness to go walking with me. After he hung up, it occurred to me I hadn't asked him why he wanted to do this. Katz was the one person I knew on Earth who might be on the run from guys with names like Julio and Mr. Big. Anyway, I didn't care. I wasn't going to have to walk alone. I found my wife at the kitchen sink and told her the good news. She was more reserved in her enthusiasm than I had hoped. "You're going into the woods for weeks and weeks with a person you have barely seen in 25 years. Have you really thought this through?" As if I ever thought anything through. "I thought you two ended up getting on each other's nerves in Europe." No. This was not quite correct. We started off on each other's nerves and then we ended up despising each other, but that was a long time ago. She gave me a look of concern. "You have nothing in common." "We have everything in common. We're 44 years old. We'll talk about hemorrhoids and lower back pain and how we can't remember where we put anything. And then the next day I'll say, 'Hey, did I tell you about my back problems?' And he'll say, 'No, I don't think so.' And we'll do it all over again. It'll be great. It'll be hell. Yeah, I know, I said. And so I found myself 6 days later standing at our local airport watching a tin commuter plane containing cats touch down and taxi to a halt on the tarmac 20 yards from the terminal. The hum of the propellers intensified for a moment, then gradually stuttered to a halt, and the plane's doorway fell open. I tried to remember the last time I had seen him. After our summer in Europe, Katz had gone back to Des Moines and become, in effect, Iowa's drug culture. He partied for years until there was no one left to party with, and then he partied with himself, alone in small apartments, in t-shirt and boxer shorts, with a bottle and a baggie of pot and a TV with rabbit ears. I remembered now that the last time I had seen him was about 5 years earlier in a Denny's restaurant where I was taking my mother for breakfast. He was sitting in a booth with a haggard fellow who looked like his name could have been Virgil Starkweather, tucking into pancakes and taking occasional illicit nips from a bottle in a paper bag. It was 8 in the morning, and Katz looked very happy. He was always happy when he was drunk, and he was always drunk. 2 weeks after that, I heard later, police found him in an upended car in a field outside the little town of Mingo, hanging upside down by a seatbelt, clutching the steering wheel and saying, "Well, what seems to be the problem, officer?" There was a small quantity of cocaine in the glove box, and he was dispatched to a minimum security prison for 18 months. While there, he started attending AA meetings. To everyone's surprise, not least his own, he had not touched alcohol or illegal substance since. After his release, he got a little job, went back to college part-time, settled down for a while with a hairdresser named Patty. For the past 3 years, he had devoted himself to rectitude and, I instantly saw as he stooped out the door of the plane, growing his stomach. Katz was arrestingly larger than when I had last seen him. He had always been kind of fleshy, but now he brought to mind Orson Welles after a very bad night. He was limping a little and breathing harder than one ought after a walk of 20 yards. "Man, I'm hungry," he said without preamble, and let me take his carry-on bag, which instantly jerked my arm to the floor. "What have you got in here?" I gasped. Just some tapes and shit for the trail. There are Dunkin' Donuts anywhere around here? I haven't eaten since Boston." "Boston? You've just come from Boston." "Yeah, I gotta eat something every hour or so. What do you call it, seizures?" "Seizures?" This wasn't quite the reunion scenario I had envisioned. I imagined him bouncing around the Appalachian Trail like some wind-up toy that had fallen on its back. Ever since I took some contaminated phenylthiamines about 10 years ago, if I eat a couple of donuts or something, I'm usually okay. "Stephen, we are going to be in the wilderness in 3 days. There won't be donut stores." He beamed proudly. "Oh, I thought of that." He indicated his bag on the carousel, a green army surplus duffel. He let me pick it up. It weighed at least 75 pounds. He saw my look of wonder. "Snickers," he explained. "Lots and lots of Snickers." We drove home by way of Dunkin' Donuts. My wife and I sat with him at the kitchen table and watched him eat 5 Boston cream donuts, which he washed down with 2 glasses of milk. Then he said he wanted to go lie down a while. It took him whole minutes to get up the stairs. My wife turned to me with a look of serene and irksome blankness. "Please, just don't say anything," I said. In the afternoon, after Katz had rested, he and I visited Dave Mangle and got him fitted with a backpack and a tent and a sleeping bag and all the rest of it, and then went to Kmart for a ground sheet, thermal underwear, and some other things. After that, he rested some more. The following day, we went to the supermarket to buy provisions for our first week on the trail. I knew nothing about cooking, but Katz had been looking after himself for years and had a repertoire of dishes, principally involving peanut butter, tuna, and brown sugar stirred together in a pot. That, he thought, would transfer nicely to a camping milieu. But he also piled lots of other things into the shopping cart. 4 large pepperoni sausages, 5 pounds of rice, assorted bags of cookies, oatmeal raisin, M&M Spam, more Snickers, sunflower seeds, graham crackers, instant mashed potatoes, several sticks of beef jerky, a couple bricks of cheese, a canned ham, A full range of gooey and evidently imperishable cakes and donuts produced under the label Little Debbie. You know, I don't think we'll be able to carry all of this, I suggested uneasily, as he placed a horse collar-shaped bologna into the shopping cart. Kat surveyed the cart grimly. Yeah, you're right, he agreed. Let's start again. He abandoned the cart there and went off for another one. We went around again, this time trying to be more intelligently selective, but we still ended up with clearly too much. We took everything home, divvied it up, and went off to pack. Kat's to the bedroom where all his stuff was, and I to my basement headquarters. I packed for 2 hours, and I couldn't begin to get everything in. I put aside books, notebooks, nearly all my spare clothes, tried lots of different combinations, but every time I finished, I would turn to find something large and important left over. Eventually, I went upstairs to see how Katz was doing. He was lying on the bed, listening to his Walkman. Stuff was scattered everywhere. His backpack was limp and unattended. Little percussive hisses of the music were leaking from his ears. Aren't you packing? I said. Yeah. I waited a minute, thinking he would bound up, but he didn't move. Forgive me, Stephen, but you give the impression that you are lying down. Yeah. Can you actually hear what I'm saying? Yeah, in a minute. I sighed and went back down to the basement. Kat said little during dinner and afterwards returned to his room. We heard nothing more from him throughout the evening. But about midnight, as we lay in bed, noises began to float through the walls. Clompings and mutterings. Sounds of furniture being dragged across the floor. A brief outraged outburst, interspersed with long periods of silence. I held my wife's hand and couldn't think of anything to say. In the morning, I tapped on Katz's door and eventually put my head in. He was asleep, fully dressed, on top of a tumult of bedding. The mattress was part way off the bed, as if he had been engaged in the night in some scuffle with intruders. His pack was full but unsecured, and personal effects were still liberally distributed around the room. I told him we had to leave in an hour to catch our plane. Yeah, he said. 20 minutes later, he came downstairs laboriously and with a great deal of soft cursing. Even without looking, you could tell he was coming down sideways and with care, as if the steps were glazed with ice. He was wearing his pack, things were tied to it all over. A pair of grubby sneakers and what looked like a pair of dress boots, his pots, pans, a Laura Ashley carrier bag, evidently appropriated from my wife's wardrobe, and filled with God knows what. This is the best I could do, he said. I had to leave a few things. I nodded. I'd left a few things too, notably the oatmeal, which I didn't like anyway, and the more disgusting looking of the Little Debbie cakes, which is to say all of them. My wife drove us to the airport in Manchester through blowing snow, in a kind of awkward silence that precedes a long separation. Kat sat in the back and ate donuts. At the airport, she presented me with a knobbly walking stick the children had bought me. It had a red bow on it. I wanted to burst into tears, or, better still, climb in the car and speed off while Katz was still frowning over his new, unfamiliar straps. She squeezed my arm, gave a weak smile, and left. I watched her go, then went into the terminal with Katz. The man at the check-in desk looked at our tickets to Atlanta and our packs and said, quite alertly, I thought, for a person wearing a short-sleeved shirt in winter, "You fellows hiking the Appalachian Trail?" "Sure are," said Katz proudly. "Lots of trouble with wolves down in Georgia, you know." "Really?" Katz was all ears. "Oh, yeah. A couple people been attacked recently. Pretty savagely, too, from what I hear." He messed around with the tickets and luggage tags for a minute. "Hope you brought some long underwear." Katz screwed up his face. "For wolves?" "No, for the weather. There's gonna be record cold down there over the next 4 or 5 days. Gonna be well below zero in Atlanta tonight." "Oh, great," said Katz, and gave a ruptured, disconsolate sigh. He looked challengingly at the man. "Any other news for us? Hospital called to say we got cancer or anything?" The man beamed and slapped the tickets down on the counter. "Nope, that's about it. But you have a real good trip. And hey," he was addressing Katz now, in a lower voice, You watch out for those wolves, son, because between you and me, you look like pretty good eating." He gave a wink. "Jesus," said Katz in a low voice, and he looked deeply, deeply gloomy. We took the escalator up to our gate. "And they won't feed us on this plane either, you know," he announced with a curious, bitter finality. So I'll be back next week to read a few pieces from their travel tales as they go along. I hope you have a great evening.